So let's start. I want to welcome you, Nadia Theodore, to our program today. For those of you who, I assume everybody knows, you wouldn't have registered, Nadia is the Consul General of Canada in the southeastern United States. You cover Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, am I right?
And Mississippi, that's right.
And Mississippi.
That's right, 6 states, yeah.
So you're on the road quite a bit. It's a pleasure to have you here in Atlanta, both virtually and for real. The program today is brought to us through the generosity of the Pendleton Group. So
oh, that's nice.
Yeah, thank you, Craig Lesser. I appreciate it.
Thank you, yes.
And Jorge Fernandez from the Pendleton Group is also in the audience, so thank you both.
Great.
This is great. We got a whole bunch of people in the audience to recognize, but I'm not going to do it because I'd rather talk to you. So if all of you in the audience, thank you for joining us. If you're important, thank you twice. And everybody's important, I'm sure. But we got some of your fellow consuls general and folks from the Atlanta airport. We've got World Affairs Council members from Central Florida and Pittsburgh. And we've got at least one person in Ontario, your sister, who has joined us. So
my fan club, yes.
Yeah, international audience. Everybody if, in the audience, please send questions to me via the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. The shorter, the better, because I'm not really good at talking, reading, and editing at the same time. So be kind to me and please send short questions for Nadia Theodore. Nadia, when you spoke to last fall to my executive MBA course, yes, I asked you, what's the strangest question, weirdest question you got about Canada? And do you remember what your answer was?
I can't remember, but I know that the weirdest question that I get that people ask me, and I doubt they ask anybody else, is, oh my gosh, there are Black people in Canada?
That's exactly it.
So maybe that's what it was.
that is exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So are there Black people in Canada, Nadia?
There are indeed, yes. Ta-da! And my sister is on the line. And my best friend, who's a judge, is also Black and Canadian.
And who's that in the photo behind you?
So this is, well, exactly. And this is Viola Desmond, who everybody who follows me and might have attended any event that I do knows about Viola Desmond. She is the first, besides the Queen, Canadian to be on our money, Canadian money. So she is now on our $10 bill. And she's a Canadian businesswoman, entrepreneur, and civil rights leader that was famous for refusing to give up her seat in a Nova Scotia movie theater. Several years, we like to remind people, before Rosa Parks did the same here in America. And so we honored her, the government honored her memory and her legacy by putting her face on the $10 bill.
That's so cool. Yeah. So let's go to that. I mean, was there segregation by law in Canada?
Yeah, so listen, so I'll start by saying I'm not a historian, and nor am I a civil rights expert, nor am I a race and equity expert. I'm actually a trade policy expert and love international economics. And what I have found over the last several weeks is that people make lots of assumptions about me and what I should know and what I do know and what my expertise are based on the way that I look. So I will start by saying that in fact my expertise is in trade and trade policy. So yeah. So yes, indeed, there was segregation in Canada. There was also slavery in Canada, which many people don't know. People know the history of us being the end point, in fact, Ontario, not far from where my sister is living right now, being the end point to the Underground Railroad, which is also true, but slavery, in fact, did exist in Canada for hundreds of years, and segregation indeed was also a reality. And more than that, and I think what we know to be true now more than ever, is beyond the legal constructs that separated Black people from white people, and in our case, and as is the case in America, from what I understand, Indigenous peoples from white people. Beyond that was the normative rules and the acceptability of discrimination that it engendered, right?
Yeah.
And so Viola Desmond is a very good example of that, because she refused to give up her seat because, in fact, there was no law on the books that said that she was not allowed to sit in that section in the movie theater. But what she was actually arrested for was not paying the appropriate fee. So she paid the fee, she paid her ticket for the movie, went and sat, and then somebody came and told her, oh, actually, this seat costs, X amount of pennies, whatever it was, right? X amount of cents. And she said, okay, well, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a businesswoman, I'm actually quite successful, here's the money. And they refused to allow her to pay the fee. So, and then when she refused to get up, they then charged her. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, one of the smart people on my staff is asking, would you please scoot closer to your camera? Can you do that?
Sure.
So that you feel more of the screen. Good. So let me ask you a question. What's it like being that?
Now I feel really close to the camera.
Well, but you look great. You look so good.
Okay.
What's it like being a foreign diplomat in the United States?
It's great. I love Atlanta.
Killed by police.
Yeah, so I say to people, people have heard me say this before, that Atlanta, I didn't choose to come to Atlanta. It wasn't, wasn't supposed to rotate the year that I got here in 2017. I had actually planned to stay in Ottawa for a couple more years. But I love the city. I love the region. I think that the history of the region is important, not just to me, but to the Canada-US relationship, especially as we go forward, and especially in this period where we hopefully have finally reached, everybody has finally reached a reckoning point with regards to anti-racism and race relations, not just in one country, but globally. And so, and people have been asking me, well, how do you feel about, Black Americans getting murdered and killed by the police and by others, and, getting, harassed in the park while they're watching birds and all the rest of it. And, I find the question a bit peculiar, because maybe peculiar is not the right word, but, I hope that I feel exactly the way that you, Charles, feel, mm-hmm. And that everybody feels, right? A sense of grief, a sense of anger, a sense of responsibility to figure out how we do better, a sense of, for me in particular, I will say, a sense of figuring out how I learn as much as possible about what the context and history is that got us to this point here in the South, and bringing that back home to hopefully address the very real issues of racism that we have, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism that we have in Canada, and how we address that. So, but I would hope that that's not a me thing. I would hope that's an everybody thing.
How do you separate your personal feeling? I mean, as an official of the government of Canada,
yeah,
and a diplomat in the United States with a diplomatic passport here, yes. So you've got you've got two roles. One is the official role, and one is the, your personal. Yeah. So how do you separate those two?
Yeah, you are a former diplomat, so we do it because it's our job to do it, right? And we do it through a lot of training and a lot of practice and a lot of role modeling of others that have come before us. And to me, it's actually not that, I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but to me, it's actually not that difficult, right? Because again, I don't view my feelings of grief and anger as a personal feeling, actually. To me, it is very much an institutional feeling. I view it as a feeling that as the institution of Canada, I feel, right? So to me, it's actually not really, it hasn't actually been that difficult for me to do, because I don't view it as personal feelings. I actually truly believe, and I'm lucky to work for a country where, you know, it is actually an official feeling. You know, the feeling of grief and remorse and wanting to do better and trying to figure that out is actually an official Government of Canada feeling. I suppose that there's such thing as a Government of Canada feeling. So it hasn't been that difficult for me.
Okay, as a diplomat, when you're abroad, you know, you get instructions from your government, you know, do this, do that, do the other thing.
Yeah.
Have you received instruction? I mean, not you personally, but you and your counterparts at the various Canadian consulates across the country and in the embassy in Washington. Have you received instructions from your government to say things, do things, go places, not go places, issue statements, meet with mayors and governors?
No, you mean on the issue of Aubrey or Floyd or any other?
Yes.
Yeah, no, and no, and you know, I have to say that absolutely we receive official instructions on many different issues throughout the year and throughout 10 years abroad. But I have to say that, you know, the mechanisms of diplomacy, in my view, and I think in the view of the Government of Canada, if I can be as bold as to say that, has changed a little bit, right? Because everything is so public and everything is so screen-led, right? I mean, and it's this 24-hour news cycle. So when you have news-heavy events, usually the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister, and all senior officials really do, and I say this honestly, really do trust the people that they have sent abroad to react and do what they feel is going to be most appropriate in their individual circumstances, in their individual regions. And then what they do is they will send us the official statement or the speech that the Prime Minister has done, right? So we can inspire ourselves from that. So no, we haven't received, you know, an official cable set of instructions. Please do this, please don't do that. Not at all. But we have had many conversations, absolutely, about what is going on across America over the past several months. And what we can do in Canada, what we can learn and what we can take from that to make Canada better and to make the Canada-US relationship better. Because at the end of the day, that's actually why I am here and my colleagues are where they are.
That's what you're getting paid to do. I've been surprised, and maybe it shows my own naivete, that there have been Black Lives Matter movements in the UK and in Belgium and in, you know, you name it, around the world. I mean, I just thought, well, this was a US thing. Yeah. And that it, you know, and instead we're seeing people throwing statues in the harbor in Bristol, England, right? And defacing the statue of Leopold II in Antwerp. Have there been similar movements in Canada? Response in Canada?
So yeah, we have Black Lives Matter chapters across Canada, in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and maybe other cities that I'm missing. And the first chapter, if I recall correctly, because I forgot my notes downstairs, was established in 2014. And it was after the killing of a Black man by a police officer in Toronto. So yeah, we have Black Lives Matters Black Lives Matter chapters across Canada. And of course in Canada, you know, we, you know, the old saying goes, when the US sneezes, Canada catches a cold. You know, our bigger cousins to the south, like all of the things that you've heard before. And so a lot of what happens in the United States, we in Canada, again, try and really look to for inspiration about what we can do right and what we can do not right? And to learn from that. So,
are any statues being toppled in Canada?
You know what? I don't know.
I'll Google it afterwards. I bet you will too. Okay, the questions are coming in. So Craig Lesser, in fact, as a Black woman, what's been your experience in Georgia and in the other 5 states that you're responsible for?
Yeah, it has been overwhelmingly positive. Overwhelmingly positive, but not dissimilar to what my experience has been when I was in Geneva, Switzerland, when I'm home in Canada. There are many people, and I've told stories before in other forums, so I won't bore you with them, but you know, there are some people that look at me, well, no longer, now you can see the gray in my hair coming out, but you know, 3 years ago, I looked fairly young, I think, and you know, being a Black woman in this role, people were kind of like, who are you? And you could, you know, you could tell, but what I will say is that usually about 15 to 20 minutes into the conversation, because usually we're talking about international trade, they kind of start nodding their head like, okay, I get why you're here. Okay, I get it. You know, I've had people come up to me after events and say, oh, wow, you really know what you're talking about. Yes, I do. That's why they put me here. So, you know, and that happens here in the Southeast USA. It happens at home in Canada. It happens, you know, everywhere around the world. And, you know, and Craig knows me very well, so this won't come as a surprise to him, but my default has always been to rise to the occasion of being underestimated. And to be strong enough to know who you are and know what you're about and not be afraid to make sure that people understand that when they might be confused. And that usually comes with, you know, mastering your subject matter and going out there and being you. And I decided, you know, quite early on, I think the first 8 months maybe of my tenure here, I tried really hard to be what people thought I should be. And then I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's exhausting. So now I'm me. And it's, to me, it's worked out quite well. And it's even, for me, if I do say so myself, it might have actually even opened doors that perhaps might have been harder to open. Because people tend to like somebody who's authentic, even if it's not traditional. So.
Well, nobody's ever accused you of not being authentic.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Okay, the questions are coming in.
Okay.
So I'm going to move to questions, and so I apologize to everybody if I shorten your question and leave out the key point or somehow misrepresent that. So this is from Dr. Jessie Legros, who is at CDC, and she says, bonjour, Nadia.
Bonjour, ça va? Au plaisir.
What is, whoops, I can't read the question. What is Canada doing to eradicate racism towards autochtones and racial minorities in the country? Indigenous Canadians, First Nations people. Yeah.
So, you know, we have, and I say to people all the time that I have no problem being quite honest about this because my Prime Minister has been quite honest. You know, he, during his first year as Prime Minister, he made a very moving, what I believe to be a very moving speech at the United Nations, and said very honestly that the treatment by those in power in Canada to Indigenous peoples living in Canada, who, you know, own the land in Canada, right, is atrocious. And it is a mark on our country. It is shameful, and we need to do better. And he has been very honest about that. And he, in fact, when he campaigned to become prime minister, during his campaign, much of the campaign was about what he and his government would spearhead, if elected, towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada. And so, you know, they were elected, and they, across all sectors, across all issues, have tried to put in place very concrete measures, whether it be to try and improve education on Indigenous reserves, to get clean water. If you can imagine, there are places in Canada, Indigenous reserves, that do not have access to clean water. Like, let that sink in. So, you know, there has been a concerted effort by the government.
We've got a city in Michigan that can't get clean water, so.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, but let that sink in, right? I mean, let that sink in as we all, you know, after this, we'll walk downstairs to our kitchen and open up the tap, turn on the tap, and get a glass of water, right? I mean, you know, and so they have done things, tried to put in concrete steps towards getting the amenities and the access to basic needs to Indigenous peoples who live on reserves. But then the other part of that, I think that the current government has tried to do, and I think all governments have tried to do, in fact, I will say, you know, everybody has different ways of doing that, but is to work towards true reconciliation. Right. And so what we know in Canada, and what everybody who is actually the expert on these issues will tell us, is that you can really only move forward once you have a process of reconciliation, a process where those who have been discriminated against and oppressed have the opportunity to really and truly feel like those in power are trying to reconcile with them, and that they can tell their stories, and have those stories be affirmed and then actioned towards justice. And so we had the Truth and Reconciliation initiative that was launched by the government, that was geared towards that. It was geared towards telling the stories, some of the stories of Indigenous peoples in Canada, towards a path of recognizing the past, atoning for the past, and then putting in concrete measures that will result in better outcomes economically and socially for Indigenous peoples.
I'm going to put in a little footnote here, just to everybody, is that the percentage of First Nation people, Indigenous people in Canada, is many times larger than it is in the U.S. So just so we understand that, I think it's less than 0.5% of the U.S. population.
Oh, is it? Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, in Canada, it's 4.3.
It's 4, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's much higher. More questions here. This is from Dr. Julius Coles, formerly of Morehouse, now of I think he's the honorary consul of Senegal, if I remember the country correctly. I hope I didn't get sticking with the wrong country.
Senegal's a good country to be stuck with.
Yeah, so. Exactly. And unless it's not his country. What do you think about the United Nations High Commission for Rights?
UNHCR, yeah.
UNHCR taking up the issue of racism, especially in the United States?
I think it's great. I really and truly believe, and I believe this personally, and I really and truly believe that if we are going to do better concretely and lasting change, concrete, lasting, structural change, we actually need to talk about what has happened.
Mhm.
And the history and the context and the trajectory of what has led us here. And I say that about the United States, but less so because, you know, I'm a guest here. I say that about my country, about, you know, about every country around the world. We know that from the South Africa experience. We know that in Canada from what we are trying to do towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We know that to be true. That if we do not sit in our uncomfortableness of even saying the word racist and racism and anti-racism, and I am a Black woman and you are a white man, and you know, if we can't get past that uncomfort and the discomfort of it, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think it's important. I think it's important for these debates to take place in all fora. Yeah, I really do. I really do.
This is from Angela Cassidy. Do you feel safe here with your daughter? Would you rather your daughter were home in Canada?
Well, yes, I'd rather she be home in Canada now because I could pawn her off to one of my best friends or my sister to play with while I work. But
you're not supposed to say that about your children.
I know. I'm sorry. People who know me know
off.
that I'm like the anti-mom, so I apologize. I do love her. She's great. But I do. Yeah, absolutely. I feel, you know, and I say to people again, to go back to this idea that, you know, Canada is this utopia. Canada is an amazing country. There is no other country that I wish to be from. You know, I was lucky to be born in Canada, and I wouldn't change that for the world. But I don't think that loving your country means that you are blind to the things that could be better. And, you know, Canada is not perfect. And so going back to that, I feel just as safe here as I do back home, right? And you know, and my husband, who is a Black man, probably feels just as safe here as he does at home. I mean, my brother, who is a Black man with dreadlocks, gets pulled over by the police all the time in Canada, right? So, I mean, it's so, and I say that for people because I know it's mostly an American audience here, just to remind you that, you know, you do have a great country and a great state and a great city. And it is a pleasure for me to be here. I love being here. Absolutely. I feel, you know, welcomed here. And all of that can exist in conjunction with the fact that we need to do better here and back home in Canada on many important issues with regards to race and race relations. The two can coexist.
This is from, and I apologize because I know I'm mispronouncing this name, Himaja Sonti, who asks,
Yeah. Oh, hi. Yes.
oh gosh, you've stacked the audience with your friends.
No, I sorted.
Okay. What words of wisdom do you share with your daughter growing up as a Black child? Do you share or plan to share your experiences with her, or view that as a baggage that you should not pass on to her?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. You know, so for better or for worse, and I'm sure I'll get lots of text messages from people with lots of opinions after this, but for better or for worse, my daughter right now, her biggest concern in life is whether or not I'm going to finally allow her to watch Barbie. And so,
wait, how old is your daughter?
She's 7.
Okay.
She's gonna be 8 in a month, actually. A month, actually, almost today. So that is actually her biggest concern in life right now, and I'm very happy for it to stay that way for as long as possible. And I might actually give in and let her watch Barbie. So, you know, but what I plan to do when she is old enough, when I feel that she's old enough, or when I get the courage up, I guess, is to remind her that there will be people in life that she will encounter that will try and make her feel less than. And that oftentimes, and I think this is the important part of it, oftentimes it will not be explicit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, it happens, absolutely. But the destructive nature of racism that I have experienced is much less about being called the N-word, or, you know, thankfully being, you know, assaulted by somebody because of my race, but more so that feeling that you get when somebody asks you, well, oh, where are you really from? Or, oh, you're so articulate, or, right? Or, you know, so all of those things, I will remind her that there will be people who will try and make her feel less than, and that her intuition when she feels that is right, because oftentimes I know for Black women in particular, we often feel and are made to feel that that intuition that we're getting, that we are being discriminated against, is suppressed, right? And we are being called, you know, we get called too sensitive or too emotional or whatever it is. So I hope to teach her that she should trust her intuition, and to know that she needs to be very careful, and people have heard me say this before, she needs to be very careful about who she gives her energy to in life, because there will be lots of people who will try and suck her energy, and not everybody wants her to succeed, even though they might smile and be very friendly and, you know, be very congratulatory to her about lots of different things. Not everybody wants her to succeed, and she needs to be very careful about who she gives her energy to in life. So that is the lesson that I hope to teach her.
Christabel Gansa asked the following, and I'm going to read it and then I'm going to add to it a little bit. She says, dealing with acts of microaggression in a predominantly white male work environment while still being professional and not being called an angry Black woman. You know, how do you deal with that? And let me add something to it. So I was on a Zoom with a friend of mine, Seth Weldon, who I think is on this call today, I hope he is, who said that every time he checks in for a flight, every time he checks into a hotel, he's treated differently than his white colleagues. Do you encounter that? And how do you deal with that?
Yes, I encounter it. And depending on the day, I either smile very politely and go about my business, or smile very politely and then have a little bit of a cry in my room, or my office or wherever, or I'm not as polite and smiley and friendly to the person inflicting that on me. Depends on the day, right? Mm-hmm. But what I will say to people is, again, knowing and being okay to, not being okay, but having the wherewithal to know that you are not imagining things, that's number one. That's number one. And number two, to me, dealing with it is a combination of getting comfortable with yourself and getting comfortable with the fact that you actually have every right, just as much right as anybody else, anybody that looks like you, Charles, or, you know, to be angry sometimes. Like, do you get angry sometimes, Charles? I'm sure you do, right? I mean,
yes, I have been known to get angry, and I'm accused of being too quick to anger.
Right? I mean, so every leader, I mean, I didn't just, you know, I didn't get skyrocketed here. I grew up in a work system where none of my bosses looked like me. Not one, I've never had one Black boss. And I have had bosses that have gotten angry lots of times at me, right? Mm-hmm. And they are allowed to do that. And they're wonderful people, actually. And some of them many of them I consider to be great leaders. With flaws, yes, because we all have flaws and none of us are perfect. And so I would say that, you know, part of what I feel is the work that we have to do as a society is to not have these different standards for people that look like me, right? So when I get angry, or when I have high standards, or when I, you know, when I'm asking for something more from teams, from whatever it is, you know, it should be no different than when somebody like you, Charles, is asking for it. To me, that's part of the work, right? And as a Black woman, what I'm slowly beginning to be comfortable with, and it has taken a lot of time, is to be okay with that, to be okay with not being perfect and being able to get angry and that be okay, right? I mean, yeah.
So Jorge Fernandez asks, what's your prescription for a shared border, shared fight, U.S., Canada against racism? What can we learn from each other?
So I think that what Canada can learn from the United States is what I admire about the United States and the people in the United States is the ability at which you actually discuss things. Like, there is not this Canadian politeness and Canadian, I don't know, maybe just politeness. That doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
And, you know, in some ways, I really enjoy the Canadian politeness.
Yes.
But when it comes to actually making systemic change on issues such as this, like I said before, you actually can't be polite, right?
Right.
You actually have to talk about it. You actually have to have these types of conversations. You actually have to have governments at all levels that are willing to roll up their sleeves and say, okay, we have a problem. What are we going to do about it? And have the society at large be comfortable with the discussion. And in Canada, I have to say that in my opinion, our biggest issue is not being comfortable with it at all. Not being comfortable with the issue of race at all. And that will hinder our progress. I think that America can learn from Canada. You know, I think that what Canada has gotten right is our willingness to try different things. So we are, at least, especially when we talk about the work that we're doing towards reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples, we have at least tried to start a discussion and continue a discussion and then pivot when we realize it's not working. And I think that says something. You know, I think that I think that that's important. I think that not being afraid to actually, especially our political leaders, not being afraid to actually try something. So I'll give you an example. We have a group of parliamentarians in Canada across several different political parties that have put together an action plan for how to combat racism in Canada. So they have put together this paper. It's actually available publicly, I believe, online, and it's signed by Black members of Parliament across all parties, and it's an action plan. You know, lots of criticism about it, lots of, okay, is this actually going to work? Is this not going to work? You know, how are we actually going to do this? But at least they're trying. And the other thing that we've gotten right is that most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, when it comes to big important issues, and we saw this with COVID, our political parties really do try and work together.
That would be novel in this country.
We do have that right, I will say.
That's great. I got a bunch more questions. We don't have that much more time left, so I'm going to ask you the questions. I don't know if there's any. I don't think there's short answers for any of these.
Okay.
From Desmond Thorpe, is racism sometimes confused with classism?
No, not in my opinion. And, you know, I'll go back to actually what Raphael Bostic, the head of the Atlanta
Fed.
Yeah, during a great podcast interview, I think it was, that he did. And he said, you know, when I go out on the street for my jog, like, nobody knows what class I am. Like, nobody knows that I'm the head of the Fed, right? They just see me as a Black man.
Right.
You know, when a member of parliament in Canada, you know, is going to the grocery store, nobody knows that they're a member of parliament, you know? So I don't think so. I mean, I absolutely, I think at the point, and I take the point that there is an intersection there, 100%, between class and race. And I think that if we are not careful, if I do say so myself, if we are not careful, we will confuse the two, right? So we will make it become a fight that poor Black people need to fight, but that more upper class Black people feel, well, you know what? That's not my issue. You know, I'm gonna buy my fancy house in a gated community and have my kids go to a fancy private school, and it's not gonna be my issue. I think that is the danger if we're not careful. Because it is a humanity problem, in my opinion, not to sound too Pollyanna about it, but it is. And to me, it's not about class. It's actually about race.
One of the things you do in Canada that a phrase that we don't use in the United States, but I think is really useful, is visible minorities.
Yeah.
I
don't love it.
You know, okay, I'll drop that. But I mean, racism in Canada, I mean, do South Asians, do Chinese,
Absolutely.
do
Absolutely. I mean,
Quebecois, do French-speaking Canadians feel racism or discrimination in Canada?
Yeah, so French-speaking Canadians are all different races. So I would think that if you are like my husband, who is Black, but also very Francophone, again, this intersectionality, right? So he absolutely feels racism that has to do with his race. It has nothing to do with his language. And he feels that with people who are not Black, who speak French and who speak English and who speak all different kinds of languages. But then, yes, absolutely. He also feels oftentimes in Canada that he is at a disadvantage in some places because his first language is French, which is something completely different, right? That has nothing to do with race. But yes, and I think, you know, I always go back to this, and we're using this phrase with regard to COVID, but I think it actually applies to this issue of race and equity as well, that, you know, we're all in the same ocean, but we're not all in this, we don't all have the same boats, right? And I think the same thing is true with regards to racism and discrimination across different groups of people. I mean, the history is very clear and the research is very clear that, and we all know this actually from history, the darker your skin is, the more you are discriminated against, right? I mean, you have a whole, actually there's an American gentleman, what's his name? The Patriot Act. Is that the name of the show? The Patriot Act? There's a show on Netflix, I think, or YouTube or something.
Yeah.
He's a Southeast Asian gentleman, and he did a fantastic skit. I'd actually never seen the show before. Somebody sent it to me. And it was all about this, you know, in the Southeast Asian community.
Hassan Minhaj.
Yes, that's right.
Is
yes, Allison, my friend, my sister. Yeah, exactly.
A Muslim of Indian descent.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, and he did this whole skit about how, you know, anti-Black racism exists in the Southeast Asian community. I spent some time in Trinidad. You know, you have a whole society there where lightening your skin, the lighter your skin is, the more beautiful you are, the more, you know, it's people, I mean, I'm not telling anybody anything new. So that's a thing. And that's a thing that is rooted in, at the end of the day, anti-Black racism.
Can I get you to stay on? I promise you could leave in 45 minutes. Can I get you to stay a few minutes longer?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because you seem like you're enjoying this. And, I got some additional questions.
Are other people enjoying it though? I mean, I hope, yeah, okay.
Nobody's dropping off, let's say that. Okay. you have suggestions for strategies for your white colleagues? You know, what should we be doing? How
Google.
can we improve this?
I think you should Google a lot before you ask your Black friends any questions. Please, 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 please use the Google. It's really helpful to give you some firsthand strategies. Lots of books out there. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo is a fantastic book that many people are suggesting as a good read. And I think it's a good read too. I think that it's actually relatable to many people. She's an HR expert and she wrote this book about why it's so hard to talk about race and the different layers of talking about race, especially for white people. So I have read it and I think it's great. You know, I also think, and this might not be popular, but you know, I also think that you should really think really hard about what your intentions are to become engaged. And I say this with love in my heart, but I remind people that Rodney King was beaten many, 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 many years ago. And so while I think it's great that people have the sudden surge of interest, and I hope that the interest actually translates into concrete action. And again, I would say that remember that action will actually require you to cede some type of power that you currently hold in your life, right? So it's not about, you know, deciding that you're going to be nicer to your kids' Black friends, or you're going to, you know, you're going to make sure that you learn things and tweet and, you know, put a Black square on your Instagram account in solidarity with everybody. Like, it actually, real institutional longstanding change means that the power structures that exist in society will have to change. And that means that the people who hold the power right now will have to be comfortable ceding some of that power. And we, you know, when we were talking about gender equality, we said the same thing, right? Pulling up a seat, or better yet, not pulling up a seat, but thinking differently about how the table is created. And I think that the same thing exists when you're talking about racism. And so that's a heavy lift, right? And so I think that people need to actually think about that, because what I can say personally, and from what I know from my friends, my Black friends, is that, and what people might be seeing, especially online, is that people are getting quite tired with the performative allyship and the performative action. And like, time's up on it, right? And so you'll actually do more harm than good, I think, in that regard. And it's okay to take time, right? It's okay not to be out there tweeting, you know, it's okay to actually be sitting, thinking, listening, learning, and planning what you intend to do, and then doing it, even if it's quietly doing it.
That's great. I got a whole bunch of questions we're not going to get to. What I need you to do is please, I hope someone on my staff wrote it down, but if not, can you text me the name of the book, and we'll send it out to everybody who's on this call, so everyone has it correctly. And I'm going to end with a question that goes back to what we were initially going to talk about when I asked you to do this weeks and weeks ago, which is U.S.-Canada trade.
Yes.
It's the area that you are super expert in. And that,
well, not super expert, but I like it. It's, you know,
you like it. You like it.
Yeah.
You know, I do too. So this is from, and I apologize, going to mispronounce your name, Françoise Favejean Fortin. How was that? And she asked, what can Georgia and Canada do to increase commercial trade flow while borders are being tightened, while there are COVID restrictions going on? You know, are there opportunities coming out of this for the trade relationship? And
that's a great
she
question.
is vice chair of the Montreal Foreign Policy Council. And I assume
Nice.
on this call from Montreal.
Oh, plaisir. That's a great question. You know, so I would remind everybody, because I know is it Louise? Her first name? Françoise. I know that Françoise knows this, but for those who might not know this, you know, the border between Canada and the United States is closed to all non-essential travel, but very much open to trade, right? So I usually give the example because it's an easy one to understand. You know, the truck drivers that go back and forth across the border delivering stuff, they are still allowed to cross the border, right? So goods and trade are still very much flowing between Canada and the United States. You know, I think that the COVID-19 has actually demonstrated the strength of the Canada-US relationship. I think that, you know, stories that many people have heard me say before, such as the mill on Vancouver Island that makes the pulp that goes into some of the PPE equipment that's used in US hospitals, is but one example. Another example is, you know, some of the restrictions that the administration was putting in place to ensure that Americans got the PPE that they needed when they realized that those restrictions might hinder some of the trading relationships between Canada and the United States. That was quickly remedied. So this idea of absolutely wanting to protect your own citizens, but recognizing that your best friends also need special consideration, and that in fact our supply chains are so closely intertwined that helping us is actually helping you and vice versa. I think that has been very much solidified via COVID-19. I also think that, you know, the number one thing that I think that we can do as just consumers and people and friends of trade, you know, USMCA will enter into force on July 1st, which also happens to be Canada Day, so happy birthday to us. That's a great birthday gift, is to get active about the importance and learn about the importance that trade has to economic growth and development and sustainability and job creation in Georgia. I think many people don't understand and might not be aware that hundreds of thousands of jobs depend on trade between Canada and the United States, that we have over 200 Canadian companies that are here in the state that are creating jobs every day, that the tourism that will, you know, be back in place once it's safe to do so between Canada and Georgia is part of the economic engine of the state. You know, Scotty Greenwood, actually, CABC, they have this program, this initiative, it's called Rebound, which is fantastic. If you are part of an organization, you can actually sign a pledge that pledges you to be vocal about the importance of trade, and I can send that link around as well. So that's
I'm going to interrupt you. What's CAVC?
It's the Canadian American Business Council. I think is the name. Somebody will correct me in there. Scotty Greenwood is the head of the organization.
Okay, got
it. So I can send it around to people. So that's another great way, right? Being vocal, because sometimes I find that Canada, we are kind of like that comfortable sweater, you know, that high school sweater that you put on and you don't really think much about until somebody's going to throw it out. And then you're like, no, my favorite sweater. We kind of forget the importance of our relationship, and being vocal about it and reminding people about it, I think is part of the work that we all can do to ensure that we maintain those strong relationships.
That's great. Nadia Theodore, I want to thank you so much. Nadia,
my friend.
Theodore, the Consul General of Canada in the southeastern United States. Thank you. This has been a terrific, looks like it's 55 minutes. I would not have guessed. It feels like we've been talking for maybe 15 minutes.
I know.
Right. Yeah. It's good. It's good to see you. So
it's good to see you.
Yeah. Thank you for giving us part of your time here today. If you're doing so many Zoom conferences this week, goodness, I feel honored for you to do it with us. Everybody who's on the line, let me tell you what we got coming up next week that you're not going to want to miss. On Tuesday, we're having a virtual farewell to the Consuls General of Ireland, Shane Stevens, and of Belgium, William de Bette. So Join us on Tuesday to say goodbye to people who have been great friends, and both of whom, by the way, cover many more states than you do. That William de Betz, the Consul General of Belgium, covers 10 states, including,
I know.
He's based here, but he covers from Florida to Arkansas, which seems to me to be impossible task. On Wednesday of next week, June 24th, we've got Eric Schelling, who's the head of global talent acquisition at the Home Depot. And he's not coming on to talk about the Home Depot, but he's coming to talk about jobs and what's the job market going to be like post-COVID. And he's one of these people who looks at thousands of resumes a day. So please join us. This is going to be terrific. Then on Thursday, we've got John Selden, the general manager of Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport, which is, he's got a huge job, and he's going to talk about what to expect with travel post-COVID. So, you know, what's it going to be like? How are we going to do it? When are the airlines going to resume flights, and how many flights, and how spaced out, and all of those things. So, got 3 great programs next week. Please join us next week. Please join the World Affairs Council if you're not a member. Nadia is a member, by the way.
I'm a member.
She's a member. If you're not, you should be feeling really guilty right now.
Very guilty.
So please join the World Affairs Council because we need you. Once again, thanks to the Pendleton Group and Craig Lesser for sponsoring our program today. Nadia, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Hope to see you soon in real life, not just virtually.
Indeed. Indeed. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, Nadia. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.